The year is 1917. 1,200 men rounded up at gunpoint, abandoned in the desert. It was over 100 degrees. No food, no water, just sand, sun, and the sound of the train leaving without them. No one was ever held accountable. No one went to jail. And here's the thing. That wasn't the end. It was just a setup. This isn't just a story from 1917. It's why justice failed and how it became a blueprint for silencing dissent in America. This is Bisbee, the aftermath, and Coverup, the part you never heard. The government called it unconstitutional, so why did the guilty walk free and the victims vanish? The bleachers are still here, the grass is still green, and if you didn't know better, you'd think Bisbee, Arizona was just another sleepy town shaking off a Saturday morning. But on July the 13th, 1917, the day after, everything changed. No cheering, no chatter, just an eerie stillness. No charges, no trial, just a one-way ticket. Their crime? Asking to be treated like human beings. Washington sent investigators. The verdict? Illegal, but justice? It never came. And what happened to the men after the train disappeared? The answer is darker than you think. When no one was punished, Bisbee quietly became something else. A template, a blueprint, and the scariest part? It still works. We're off the beaten path. When we first told this story of Bisbee deportation, we thought we'd closed the case. 1,200 miners, a train, and a desert. No one was supposed to survive. But then you, our viewers, responded. The comments, the questions, the outrage. Some of you even argued this wasn't a deportation at all, and for the record, we didn't make that part up. Bisbee deportation was the name used in 1917 by local newspapers, the mining company itself, and even President Wilson's own mediation commission. Back then, deportation didn't always mean sending someone to another country. It could mean forcibly removing people from a community, and that's exactly what happened here. Call it eviction by locomotive if you like, but the name stuck. And yes, we heard your feedback about the music. Apparently our dramatic score was a bit more dramatic than intended. Consider it dialed back. After all, the real story is loud enough on its own. So why are we making these videos? Because memory is short and patterns repeat. We get it. Wartime urgency. Copper was critical. 1917 was a pressure cooker. Many deportees were immigrants. And the IWW opposed the war. Here's the thing that bothers us the most. If it was really about national security, why didn't they just arrest people and put them on trial? Instead, they dumped both American and non-citizens in the desert without due process. Even the Supreme Court called it illegal. They said they couldn't do anything about it. When we abandon the Constitution for the greater good, we don't protect America. We're becoming the thing we're supposed to be fighting against. The miners wanted fair wages and safe conditions. The companies wanted maximum profits. In the middle were American soldiers who needed copper. There had to be a better way than cattle cars and a desert exile. You wanted the full picture, not just what happened, but what happened next. And as always, keep your questions coming. Your curiosity keeps these stories alive. So as Paul Harvey used to say, and now the rest of the story. By 1916, copper was king, and the workers were expendable. Then, April 6, 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany. Overnight, copper became a military necessity. Prices soared, profits exploded, but the miners' wages stayed flat. Enter the industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies, or IWW, a radical union unlike any other. They organized everyone the other unions ignored, immigrants, black laborers, women, binding them into one big union. But most controversially, they condemned the war itself. Quote, "We condemn all wars, and in time of war, the general strike in all industries," unquote. To the mine owners and politicians, this wasn't protest, it was treason. In a company town, in a country at war, the match was lit. On June 26, the IWW committee walked into the Phelps Dodge headquarters with 6 simple demands. Not revolution, just basic human dignity. No firing older or injured workers, 2 men per heavy machine, no working alone in a deep shaft, no blasts while men are inside, A flat wage of $6 a day underground and $5.50 topside. End union discrimination. Safety first. Phelps Dodge's response came in one word: treasonable. In their minds, a strike during wartime wasn't disobedient, it was sabotage. What happened next would make history and set the precedent that echoes today. If you're enjoying this video, do us a favor. Hit that like and subscribe button. It would mean a whole lot to us and helps us grow the channel. The morning after their demands were rejected, the miners struck back. On June 27, 1917, 80% of Bisbee's copper miners walked off the job. Production didn't just slow, it collapsed. The mining company hit back, branding the strike as treason. Sheriff Henry Wheeler, an ex-Rough Rider who charged up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt, vowed to restore order. Wheeler demanded federal troops. But when the Army sent an investigator, his report was damning for the companies. The strike was completely peaceful, and no soldiers were needed. Still, cracks appeared, the labor movement fractured. The Conservative American Federation of Labor denounced the strike, accusing the companies of provoking the IWW to discredit labor, while the International Union of Mine Workers stayed neutral. The IWW stood alone. By July 8th, the strike was sputtering. Mines ran at half capacity. Behind the scenes, something darker was taking shape. A year earlier, local businessmen had quietly formed the Businessmen's Protective Association. Their goal? Crush labor organizing before it started. Now they escalated. Now mining companies created a shadow force, the Workmen's Loyalty League. Deputized by the sheriff, these weren't lawmen. These were fellow workers turned enforcers. Their job, obedience, not justice. On July 11th, Sheriff Wheeler called a secret meeting. 3,000 men, armed and angry. Phelps Dodge President Walter Douglas was blunt. Quote, "There will be no compromise because you cannot compromise with a rattlesnake," end quote. He wasn't just talking about the IWW. He meant all organized labor. Wheeler's plan was surgical. Seize communications, deputize a 2,000-man army, and clear Bisbee of undesirables in a single morning. At dawn, the roundup would begin. At 6:30 a.m. on July 12, 1917, Bisbee woke to martial law. Sheriff Wheeler's proclamation was everywhere, nailed to walls, posted to shop windows, and splashed across newspaper headlines. The Bisbee Daily Review, owned by the mining companies, blared that strikers were terrorizing local workers and threatening national security itself. Wheeler declared, "This is no labor trouble, but a direct attempt to embarrass the government." While residents read in shock, his 2,000-man posse was already moving. Split into armed bands, Wheeler's men swept block by block, breaking into homes, dragging men from their breakfast tables, hospital beds, and even their jobs. Strikers, sympathizers, anyone who'd spoken up for workers' rights. Some had never even joined the strike. Suspicion alone was enough. Prisoners were herded into the streets, marched to the baseball field in Warren, where the tracks ran past the grandstand. With every block, the line grew longer. Then came violence. When the posse tried to arrest James Brew, not IWW, just a supporter, he demanded to see a warrant. Shots were fired, and when the smoke cleared, Brew lay dead on his own porch. 2 men died that morning, but the death wouldn't stop Wheeler's machine. The roundup continued, the baseball fields filling with prisoners and the trains waiting. The posse arrested 1,186 men, miners, union organizers, immigrants, and anyone suspected of sympathizing with labor. By noon, the prisoners were marched at gunpoint to 24 boxcars and cattle cars supplied by a Phelps Dodge subsidiary. No charges, no judge, no trial, just a one-way ticket out of town. The train rolled out of Bisbee bound for Columbus, New Mexico, but the tiny border town with 400 people slammed their doors shut, fearing the cargo was full of German spies and saboteurs. The cattle cars reversed course and finally screeched to a halt in Hermanus, a remote railroad siding chosen specifically for its isolation. Their armed guards unlocked the doors not to release the men, but to abandon them. It was 108 degrees. The deportees, some still in work boots, others barefoot from their beds, faced an endless expanse of sand, scrub, and sun. No food, no water, no shelter, and the sound of the train disappearing into the distance. So many viewers asked what happened next. It was raw survival. The men huddled in meager shade of empty cattle cars, torn up shirts for makeshift water filters, hoping for rescue. Some started walking towards what they hoped was a civilization, but for 2 brutal days they waited. Finally, local ranchers and Red Cross workers arrived with water and supplies. On July 14th, the U.S. Army stepped in, relocating the survivors to a temporary camp in Columbus. But they weren't welcomed as victims. They were treated like suspects. Despite being American citizens illegally moved from their own homes, they faced interrogation and searches for radical literature. They had to prove they weren't traitors after being exiled for being un-American. Officially, no one died at the Bisbee deportation. Unofficially, when you dump over 1,000 people in 108-degree heat without food, water, or shelter, some truths evaporate along with the evidence. Many suffered severe dehydration, heat stroke, and psychological trauma. The real damage, though, extended far beyond the desert. Most never got their jobs back. Others found themselves blacklisted. Families were separated for weeks, some forever. And one rule was carved in stone: they could never return to Bisbee. The day after the deportation, Wheeler's Loyalty League transformed the town. Armed sentries sealed every road. Passports were demanded at the gates. Outsiders faced secret tribunals. Most ended with deportation or the threat of lynching if they came back. Even some state officials needed permission to enter. Union men, civil rights lawyers, former residents denied, deported, or arrested on sight. Bisbee wasn't just a town anymore. It was a fortress. And what it walled out wasn't just people, it was dissent itself. Within hours of the deportation, the Copper Queen Mine and the Citizens Protective League moved to complete the purge, evicting families from company owned housing. Belongings were hurled into the street like garbage. Pro-deportation vigilantes patrolled the neighborhoods, ensuring that no one dared to offer shelter to the traitors' wives and children. The message was clear: help a deportee family, you'd be next. Some families survived only through whispered networks, sympathetic neighbors who risked their own jobs and safety to slip them food or temporary shelter. Others fled Bisbee entirely, scattered like leaves to Douglas or Silver City or across state lines. The IWW charity kitchens in distant cities became lifelines for families whose breadwinners had vanished into the desert. The deportees were gone, their families were broken, their community was shattered, and in the silence that followed, the mines hummed back to life exactly as planned. In July 1917, Arizona had a leadership crisis. Governor Thomas Campbell, embroiled in election disputes, stayed silent through the deportation. His predecessor, George Hunt, didn't. He appealed directly to President Wilson for federal intervention. Wilson responded by dispatching the President's Mediation Commission, led by a Secretary of Labor William Wilson and a young Harvard lawyer named Felix Frankfurter. Bisbee was their first stop. Frankfurter's investigation was damning. His official report declared the deportation, quote, wholly illegal and without authority in law, end quote. Privately, he was harsher. The perpetrators had, quote, wrapped themselves in the flag to crush labor, then blamed the IWW for the fallout, end quote. But the outrage led nowhere. The commission quietly disbanded, no indictments, no trials, not even a reprimand for the 224 men identified as orchestrators. Frankfurter returned to Harvard and eventually rose to the Supreme Court. But in Bisbee, the town swallowed the truth, and justice, like the governor, never showed up. Nearly a year later, the federal authorities finally acted. Sheriff Wheeler and 21 deputies were indicted for conspiracy to violate civil rights in the United States versus Wheeler, a case that would reach the Supreme Court and reshape American justice. The verdict? Chilling. Over 1,200 Americans had been kidnapped at gunpoint, hauled across state lines, and dumped in the desert. Yet the Supreme Court ruled 8-1 that the federal government was powerless to intervene. Why? Because Wheeler and his posse weren't acting as state agents. They were just private citizens. This was a legal paradox. When the state officials break the law, they magically stop being state officials. And if they're not state officials, federal civil rights laws don't apply. It was a constitutional catch-22 that made accountability impossible. Justice Louis Brandeis, writing for the majority, was blunt. Without a specific federal statute, vigilante deportations were simply not our problem. Arizona refused to prosecute on its own. No one faced trial, no one paid a fine, no one served a day in jail. The largest mass kidnapping in American history disappeared into legal limbo, along with any hope of justice. The precedent was set. If you're powerful enough, you can break the law and walk away. At the ballpark in Bisbee today, there's nothing. No plaque, no marker, no memory. And in Hermanus, just desert. Flat, empty, silent. The end of the line for American justice. So why no monument? No historical marker? No trace that this ever happened? Because it was designed to be forgotten. What happened here shredded the Constitution. And what happened next proved that power protects power, and memory is the first casualty. But here's what they couldn't erase. The truth. We found it, we told it, and now you know it. Because history doesn't disappear on its own. We let it disappear. The miners of Bisbee deserve better. They deserve justice. They deserve to be remembered. So what are the forgotten stories in your town? What injustices lie buried in your local history? What voices were silenced? What truths are waiting to be unearthed? Drop us a line below. Your tip could be our next journey off the beaten path, because every town has secrets, and every secret deserves its day in the sun. We're off the beaten path.